Welcome to another Beyond All Reason video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Armada in T2 and just some, well, this is a generalized T2 guide. So I'm just doing a little bit of setup here, so don't mind all of this. It's just some pre-work to get everything set up for how you will be in T2. And just I want to go over some of the general things you can do to try to improve your T2 as air and the transition from T1 to T2. It can be a little bit challenging as there's a lot of things to deal with. You definitely want to keep an eye on the front line to make sure that there's not a lot of air harassment going on, and that's something actually that in this game I'm not going to really show you quite as well, just because this is mostly focused on the economy side, and I didn't really have a lot of T1 fighters at the beginning. Generally, when you are in T1, you're going to want to build a decent amount of fighters first, and that's not really the case in this game. So I'm basically starting out with almost no fighters on the field. I only have like 2, and that's just because of how I set up the map. Anyway, you're going to buy your T2 constructor from your ally and have a transport ready to transport him over. And this is really important because you need your T2 mexes upgraded as quickly as possible. Now, we already have a con turret out here, and that is because we generally in T1, a con turret is going to be one of the first things you build as Armada Air, or as any air player. Armada Legion, Cortex, either one, you're going to want a con turret out here just to be able to increase your build power, because the constructors are very expensive. Air constructors are very expensive, both in build time and in actual like metal and energy as well. So going for a bunch of T1 air constructors is generally not a good thing. So we got our first mechs out, and we're going to be just going and upgrading all of these mexes as much as we can. Now, an interesting thing to note is that this build turret is outside of the range for upgrading this mechs, and so that's going to become an issue later on. You want to try to get these upgraded as quick as possible because they triple or quadruple your income. Sorry, I always say that. 4 times your income in metal. So upgrading these quickly is very, very valuable. And our T2 constructor, you can see we're placing down some new blueprints here. So we're just going to upgrade all of our mexes, and then we're going to go into a fusion reactor. Now, one thing that's nice about the transport is you can transport your build turret to wherever you want it, and that's very valuable because if for some reason you need to move from one location to another, it's very easy to do with an air transport. I find that generally after I am past T1, I don't really need the air transports that much. Here you can see we are low on metal. We're at 100 metal, but we're going to be reclaiming our lab, and I would only recommend, actually I'm going to pause here. So I would only recommend that you reclaim this lab if you have air control, if you have a decent amount of fighters out on the front, if you have air control, maybe you've held off a T1 bombing run, who knows what it may be, but as long as you maintain control on the air side of things and there's not a risk of heavy bombing and you have a decent amount of fighters out on the front, then I would recommend reclaiming that T1 lab to put the metal into your T2 mexes, into your fusion reactor. Okay, and we'll be explaining that as we go on here in a little bit. So reclaiming this lab just for the extra metal. It is a little bit more risky to do, but it is generally a good idea if you have a decent fighter wall already up. Then you can see we're going for a little bit more build power here. Some of that metal that we got from the lab just going into that build power. And we're getting our next mechs up. Also, guys, if for some reason you disagree with this, definitely leave a comment down below. Let me know your order in what you would do, your build order for T2 transition, because things like that can help a lot of these new players getting started in the game to have a more efficient build. And now we're going straight into the fusion reactor. Now, the reason why we get a fusion reactor up quickly is because this is going to give us an extra 10 metal per second. once we get the fusion up and the converter, and that's just going to help our economy begin to spiral very rapidly. And generally what I do, this is my personal preference, if caveat, if I have a good fighter wall, if they aren't trying to push me as T1 air, I will build a fusion. If they are trying to push me, I will go into another T1 factory and just start pumping fighters, because those fighters are going to be the only thing that keeps your friendly team from getting bombed to the ground, right? So we got these that fusion reactor, and it's going to take a little while. You can see we're at 56% here, and we just don't quite have enough metal to do it. So I'm sacrificing my comm over here, and we're going to suck up all of his metal and use that to help fund the fusion reactor. And that's just going to get us a little bit further, a little bit faster. So you can see we're ramping up our build speed now. And now we're starting to drain on energy, which is another problem in and of itself. We're at basically stalled on energy completely. And we're going to be stalled here for a bit, but we'll go ahead and speed past this part here because it's just pretty basic. And we got our converter going up, and that's going to convert our energy into metal. And then right after that converter goes up, we go into our lab. Keep in mind, if for some reason there's a disaster, actually I wanted to mention one more thing. If for some reason there's an issue on the front line, maybe go into a T1 lab and just pump tons of fighters. If you have the opportunity, go into a T2 lab. Now, another thing, I did a mistake here. I should not have started building this fusion because it's just using my metal. And there's no reason to use this metal at this point because it's just slowing down my lab. It would have been better to focus the lab and then go for the fusion reactor. Now, if for some reason you do make a mistake like this, you can minimize the damage by taking your constructor and putting him on low priority. This low priority state means that he gets less of the metal and other things will get more of the metal. Now, con turrets all automatically are in a low priority state. You can toggle them to a high priority state so that they get the metal first. So that's a good way to prioritize what thing gets built first. And this is why it's actually not too big of a deal if you have two things building at once, if you have the priority state toggled correctly. That's a good way to fluctuate what is being built more rapidly, okay? So that's just a good thing to remember. We got our second fusion going up, and the first thing we built is our constructor here. This T2 constructor is going to be going for these converters. The converters are going to just continue to help as we get a fusion reactor out again. We're going to want the converter to just help sustain conversion and keep our metal production up. And we're going for a little bit more build power. Basically, anytime you start to get a little bit more metal flowing in, you want to add build power to it. Also, another thing that's important is generally after you get this T2 lab up, you're going to want at a couple constructor turrets locked onto this lab. You can see that guard symbol. They are guarding this lab. And what that's going to do is it's going to constantly pump out a stream of T2 fighters the whole time. And so that can be really helpful. You can see we don't really have a lot of fighters, T2 fighters, but we're working on it. We're pumping out T2 fighters as we're getting our economy going. So generally you'll actually have more than this on the front unless there was like a big battle or an emergency type of thing. But yeah, just constantly pumping out fighters while working on upgrading our economy is very important, because you want to have the ability to shut down any bombing runs that may end up coming in the future. You know, you never know, because you could go for an early like T1 bombing run and wipe someone's base out, and if you're not careful with a decent wall of air defending it, it could be a problem. So we almost have our second fusion up, and we're just gonna keep scaling here. And this is all a time game, and that's a lot of what air is. Air really power spikes at around, I would say, maybe 20 minutes. Air will like power spike really heavily. And most of the rest of the game, you're just kind of trying to scale slowly over time and then push hard on the enemy when you hit that good scaling point. So we're going to go for probably 2 or 3 fusions. You can see we have a decent amount of energy up here that's being converted. We were overflowing a little bit, and that's not ideal, but it's also not the end of the world, right? Also not the end of the world. So, yep, just continuing to scale here. And I haven't really stopped making fighters. We're just staying consistent here. And now I'm getting into what I would call a repeat factory. And this is where you have a set number of units and the ratio is like decent so that you have the correct amount of things for everything you need to do. And then you just have that on repeat so it will cycle through over and over again. So what I like to do is have around 40 fighters in a cycle, and then 1 radar per cycle, and then 1 atomic bomber. You could do something different than that, but this is more for like wider maps where you can get really valuable bombing runs in with the atomic bomber, especially if there's a lot of ground to cover. It can be hard to cover with air defense. So what this strategy would be is like a poke in and poke out type of fight. And then you can also build an EMP bomber in that mix. And so what the EMP bomber does, in fact, you might actually want that kind of early on as well. The EMP bomber can patrol to catch any leaks that are happening. So if you just set the EMP bomber to patrol a certain area, if any enemies come within that range, he's going to stun them so that they can't continue to push in on your allies' bases and economy. So that's a really great support unit that you should just mix in if you get the chance. You can also go for the abductors. Those are very strong with their EMP capabilities as well. And I don't usually go for strategic bombers, but if you want to plan a bombing run, you can. I would probably do that after my 3rd fusion if I was going to do a T2 bombing run. 3 fusions should be enough to get you there. If you want to do just kind of a rinse or repeat and maintain air superiority, then something more like this and just continuing to slowly scale is a good idea. And at a certain point, you can probably shut down your scaling, at least temporarily, just to, if you want to like make a big play, shut down your scaling. So you can see we're going for another couple fusions, and that's just because we can, you know, we have air superiority still. We haven't had any aggression. You could do a little bit of scouting to see if you match with their air, and if you do, then, you know, you can keep scaling, or you could try a bombing push. If you aren't matched with their air, you need to probably stop scaling, focus air, focus fighters, and then push into scaling again after that. Anyway, so this is, we're just continuing to go here, and this will take a little bit because it's just time, right? We're at 13 minutes in game for 4th fusion. You could eventually get an APHIS up at some point if you wanted to. And you can see we're starting to pump fighters out more rapidly. Keeping an eye on our metal production. If our metal gets too crazy, then we're going to want to build a little bit more build power. And you can see after that fusion is done, we'll slow down here. After that fusion is done, now we are maximized on metal, like to a crazy extent. So what you're going to want to do shortly after that is get a bunch of build power all across next to your factory, and then you can start really pumping out units, like heavily pumping out units. So you're gonna see here I grab my constructor, my T1 constructor, and I just go to build tons and tons of build power. And that was a little bit late, and that's just because I got distracted. I think I was talking to my wife or something at that point. So we start pumping build power as quickly as we can here, trying not to overflow, because we are really maxed out here. Speed this build power process up a bit. Perfect. Okay, and now we have our EMP bomber out. So what I sent this guy to do is just to, he's gonna do a patrol pattern across the front. You could get EMP bombers out early if for some reason there's a bunch of leaks. Getting them out sooner than this would be a great option, just because you can stop leaks right in the tracks and give your team a big advantage. So I definitely would recommend having a handful of these on your backline as well. And then we have the atomic bomber coming in. Now this guy, we're going to just go to like do a final blow on the enemy, obviously, because this isn't a real airplay. you know, the enemy's not really going into air, so it's obviously easy. We scouted to verify the enemy's position, and then you can come in and do strategic bombing runs on them. I already made an atomic bomber guide if you are curious on how to do the atomic bomber and some of the strategies I use for him. Obviously, you can change it based on your own preferences, but this is just the way I like to use him as well. And anyway, that's the end of the guide. I hope it gives you at least an idea of how to do the economy of T2 air more effectively. And then definitely leave some comments down below if you have some different strategies. Also, if you enjoy these types of guides, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Liking the video does way more than I could ever tell you. It's just incredibly valuable for the channel. If you guys like the video, it helps out with the algorithm a ton. Anyway guys, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys on the battlefield.